In this episode, I'm excited to do something different with someone I've already had on Dose of Depth. I'll include a link to my previous chat with Sher titled Misfits to the Rescue: The Intersection of Autism, Giftedness, and ADHD. Cher embraces her uniqueness as someone with a recently discovered neurotype intersection of autism, giftedness, and ADHD. She's passionate about transformative change and the intricacies of liberation psychology. She's also the visionary founder and co creator of the Compassion Collective, where she curates a diverse community of social misfits for the purpose of navigating the intersections of social exclusion, neurodivergence, and substance use disorders. It was Cher's idea to have a conversation about peace building. I thought it was interesting that she considered my mission to grow a movement of self reflecting humans as peace building work. I had never thought about it that way, but I was intrigued. So today, Cher is going to be asking the questions, and we're going to chat about peace building. In addition to becoming educated about the topic, I know you'll be inspired to search out and get involved in movements that you might not think of as peace building projects. My other goal is for you to realize that exploring your unconscious and disarming your emotional reactions to other people results in your showing up in the world differently. The once emotional reactions shift to more effective responses that can counter the momentum today experiencing in the spreading of extreme, rigid, and stagnant ideas that are being expressed through aggressive and even violent means. We need to become aware of how we can be peace builders. And before we get started, could I ask you a favor? If you enjoy Dose of Depth podcast, would you please share the episodes you like with at least one other person or your whole network? And would you also consider supporting me as a creator and producer for $5 per month? I'll include the link below. So let's get started. Well, welcome back, Cher.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be back. This is really
Yeah.
awesome. This is really just an interesting way of talking about this kind of what is can be considered a really complex topic
Mhm.
or elusive, maybe even topic for people. But I really think we're going to discover that it's something that anybody can do, really,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, sometimes we overthink things, right? The
Yeah,
one-sided masculine.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so why don't you start by just telling us what's going on in your life? I think it's a year since we had our last podcast
Yeah,
chat. I can't believe it.
yeah,
And also just like, what has happened that one day you're like, hey, Dub, I think we should have a peace building chat and I think we should do it this way. So just
yeah,
tell the story.
yeah. I'll tell you the story. So since I guess since the last podcast, I've learned so much more about just my own personal self and being and my neurotype and all these different things, and really have come into my purpose. I would say that's really where I'm at right now. I launched the Compassion Collective, which has been going really, really well. And I won't go into depth on that here, but we can put a link in or whatever for others to check it out. But that's been a really fun co-created project where we're really doing things differently in community, really building systems that are based on consent and really having a holistic and healing kind of community for neurodivergent people. So that's been really exciting. And I'm still in my master's program, and I'm a very experiential learner, right? So like when I want to learn something new, I want to learn it from every like perspective I can take from it. And so part of that is why like I asked you to do this with me. Like we were talking about how we could collaborate again. And I was like, well, peace building, I started as I got more and more in depth into peace building. I was like, this is like stuff that so many of my friends are doing, right? Like so many people that are in the healing modalities, that are in different aspects of psychology or therapy or somatic work or any of these things are doing this work. And so I was like, wow, I think me and Deborah could have a really cool conversation about this. I mean, this is like right up your alley. and then you get the message from me and you're like, is this right up my alley? And then we're gonna find that out. It is.
Oh, yeah, it was like a rabbit hole. Well, I have so many thoughts as you're gonna see, but if we and I'm thinking about a recent couple of podcast episodes I've had with contributors to the book Healing the Most Ancient Human Wound, which is the gender wound,
Hmm.
right? So there's what is peace building? It's it's transcending opposing or perceived opposing forces. That
Yeah.
is essentially depth
Oh my
psychology. So
gosh.
yeah,
That is,
so
yeah, that's like so spot on. And I'll give, just so the audience has kind of like a broad definition of peace building. Peace building refers to the efforts aimed at creating sustainable peace by addressing the root causes, and I think that's really an important piece there, the root causes of conflict, which you just talked about,
mhm,
and fostering reconciliation, development, and governance. It involves a comprehensive approach that includes various activities and processes designed to prevent the reoccurrence of violence by addressing structural and societal issues. So that's
yeah,
just the broad definition for everyone.
yeah, and you've got some really excellent questions coming up, like, well, how do you do that collectively? You can't really do it without it being done at the
Hmm.
individual level. So,
Yeah.
one thing before we get started with the questions is even I think we take for granted what is peace?
Hmm.
I mean, what is the definition of peace? It is like you could say, well, it's the absence. No, what is peace? Because
Hmm.
conflict is actually how we do expand consciousness. So
Yeah.
it's not an absence of conflict because conflict is what prompts growth. So like
Yeah.
how do you define peace?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that there is a misunderstanding generally in communities that it is like peace is only present when there is an absence of
Mhm.
conflict, but conflict is actually what helps create
Yeah.
understanding. There's a book that I read by Sarah Schulman. It's called Conflict is Not Abuse. I recommend it to everybody.
Ooh.
It really goes deep into understanding how conflict can actually be generative. It can actually help us create peace, right? But it's how we do that conflict, right? And that's what peace building is. And Sarah Schulman, she talks a lot about relational dynamics, where you're going to talk more about the internal dynamics,
Mhm.
but she's talking about between self and other. And so it's a really just an interesting take on that. I learned so much from that just for my own personal relationships. But I'm just so excited to talk to you because I also really believe that peace starts within us, right? I think you have
Yeah.
to have a level of internal peace with yourself in order to understand how to have that relationship with others, right? And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I'm just so excited. And
Well, yeah.
yeah.
Well, and also just one thing, like we can't really come to understand the inner opposition except through our relations with others.
Hmm.
So we relate through projection and other people mirror back what wants to be explored in ourselves. So it's like this, it's this not chicken and egg, but it's this feedback
Feedback
loop,
loop.
right? So other people mirror back something about us and where there's an emotional charge. It's not about them. They're just kind of like the carrier and they're like the mirror, like, yeah, that might be objectively really annoying what they just did or objectively bad. But
Mhm.
your emotional reaction is about you and your wound. So I love the name of that book because we actually do require then conflict. Conflict isn't violence. Conflict is just like, oh, there's these
Mhm.
two things that are kind of in opposition. And then
Mhm.
Carl Jung has this concept he calls the transcendent third. And it's by holding the tension between the two things that feel to be in opposition, holding it, holding it, holding it. And then all of a sudden there's a new
Yeah.
idea that transcends the opposition, and it's
Mhm.
not a choice of either or. It's like, oh well, I could think about it this way, where there's a light and a dark side of this and a light and dark side of this, and then all of a sudden you have something that's more complex.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I interviewed Chick Dombach, who is a world-renowned peace builder. He's been doing this work since the 60s. He was an activist in the 60s, and that's a lot about what he talked about in his peace building efforts. And he's been doing this globally, like
Mm.
big global conflicts. And his process was that feedback loop, being able to hold two potentially what we would normally think as completely opposing or
Mhm.
divisive
Yeah.
understandings of a situation, and to keep bringing them closer together until they can meld into something that works for both
Yeah.
sides, right?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
beautiful, comical. So, okay, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah.
So, and I love your question. So, let's just get to it. And
Yeah.
I really like the idea, and I said this in my intro, of I think, I'm all about helping people just see things a little differently. So they're going to see, peace building where maybe they didn't really realize that was going on. And then they'll also be able to integrate a peace building approach to whatever relationships they have, whether it's the work. I mean, it just gets to be really fun and juicy once you have like this sort of new framework for how to look at things. You're like,
Mhm.
oh,
Yeah.
this could actually be interesting, not just like,
Right.
So anyway, so
Yeah.
all right, let's throw it to
I
you.
agree. I think that's one thing that we are the same about, is like we're like, oh, conflict, juicy.
Yeah.
Let's see where we can go with this. But
Yeah.
okay, so yeah, and I'm really honored. Thank you for allowing me to be the host of your podcast today.
Yes.
So
Yes. I'll be the guest on my own podcast. I love it.
uh, all right. So when you think about the concept of peace building, what comes to mind, and how would you define it based on your understanding so far?
That question is so rich. I mean, oh, my unconscious just started throwing things up. So I don't know, maybe I should go in the order of where it came up, and I wrote down some notes. So the first thing I think about is a national organization called Playworks. So this is where I'm like, peace building, huh? I think that's going on here, 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 even though these aren't things that are labeled as peace building activities, but they just emerged to me as, oh, that's peace building. So Playworks is a national nonprofit that transforms school climate through play, specifically building community on the playground. And so, a lot of people in a lot of schools just think, oh, teachers get a break. Let's just let the kids out like wild animals on the playground. Or maybe it's too controlling. Or some people have the weird idea that, oh, they'll just figure it out. Like, we don't learn how to be in community, like just instinctually, just being put together with kids from different areas of the city or whatever. So what was amazing about Playworks, besides it being really researched and evidence-based, was that our most powerful testimonials when I was the executive director there were from special ed teachers.
Ah.
And they would say, oh my gosh, with Playworks, they're just so much happier. Like everybody was happier, but because we often look at people who are, let's say, misfits, or they are not the norm doesn't really mean good, right? It just means the usual, right?
Mhm.
So when something's usual, not usual, we tend to want to force it to conform to what's usual, even if that is not, even if it's dysfunctional, right? And so with Playworks, the idea is that we build community, and community adjusts to the unusual. So
Mm.
they are embrace the kids with special needs. And so instead of forcing, people with kids with autism, where they have such an intense relationship with their inner world, instead of forcing them to be extroverted, right? Instead, the rest of the community has deeper understanding of their needs. And so it's more of like the majority is adapting to those. I mean, it was just beautiful. So I think that is a kind of peace building, right? And everybody's happier.
Absolutely.
Like the bullies are happier,
Yeah.
right? So, because what is a bully, right? A bully is an outer manifestation of a really deep insecurity. And so,
Mhm.
in a Playworks model, everyone is valued, and everyone is also responsible for tending to the needs of the community. And the other thing is that with Playworks, that the kids actually are helping run the program. So they're becoming like junior leaders. And so they
Mhm.
feel a sense of purpose. And I think I didn't really think about this, but I think a sense of purpose is probably important to peace building activities, without knowing if that's true or not, but it just seems kind of intuitive. So that's the first thing that comes up for me. I had a recent conversation with an author, Mark Beneteau. He wrote a fabulous book called As Lovers Do, which
Mm,
really is about like sexuality is potentially transformative, but he talks about the fluidity of the masculine and the feminine, the inner. So again, what is perceived to be opposing are really just complementary, right? And he is part of a movement called authentic relating and intentional community building. And
mhm,
that's a movement that's been around apparently for like 20 years, authentic relating. So that's peace building. As he talks about authentic relating, he talks about each person is creating space to express and receive each other's experience in the moment. So, for example, I feel nervous right now.
mhm.
Typically, we wouldn't say that, we'd have a mask, right? And then
Yeah,
the other person might say, "Oh, really? You don't look nervous," or
yeah.
whatever it is. And just that kind of holding space for that vulnerability is that's what I think of as peace building, right?
Can I chime in and just say
Yeah.
that Deborah did this for me at the beginning before we came on camera. Um,
And
I
I don't even know that I'm doing that.
Well, I think that's just who you are. You know, you have this ability to make people feel really comfortable and safe enough. You make me feel safe
Yeah.
enough to express to you that
Yeah.
I was feeling nervous and a little anxious, and that authentic
Yeah.
relating, you were able to help me co-regulate before this. And so, yeah.
Yeah, so there's an example for our listeners because during my interview with Mark, he's like, we are explaining what circling is. So that's what I was just describing. And he goes, "You're doing it right now. Like you're circling." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, I am." But now I'm like aware that's what I'm doing. So when
Mhm,
you're aware that you're doing it, you actually can then like you're modeling it so that they can do it too. So,
mhm,
okay, oh good. So the other thing that comes up for me is the Gender Equity and Reconciliation International Group. So they've been around for 30 years. So Cynthia and William, husband and wife founder around the globe, they facilitate and they train people to facilitate healing the gender wound. And they bring groups of men and women together because our conversation was around especially how men are wounded by patriarchy. Like we think, oh yeah, they got it all going on, but no, women's wound to patriarchy is more obvious. It has to do with feeling limited. And what are women doing? They're like, no way, man. I'm going to do what I want these days.
mhm,
Men's patriarchal wound is men keeping them in their place about how to express their masculinity. Like
mhm,
men can emasculate other men way easier and way more, way more dramatically than women can. And so in their training, they have a circle of women, a circle of men, and the women often will go first, and the men will circle around them and they will just observe the women sharing their experiences. And so that, and I asked who goes first, and I thought, I wonder if that's really helpful for men to first witness the vulnerability that women have of sharing their stuff. And then they all stand up, the men go sit down, the women circle around them, and the women listen to the men sharing their experiences. And that is peace building. And
yeah,
then
brilliant.
I had a conversation with a retired judge, Mary Trujillo, and she is the director of a restorative justice program at Marquette University, which is my alum. I'm an alum there. And, restorative justice is also balancing out, right? A masculine approach to to justice.
Mhm.
And the masculine approach isn't working, right? And
Punitive approach does not work.
right. So there has to be like this fluidity. So I thought anything where there's this like trying to not do either or is the disease of patriarchy, right? And so really peace building work is harnessing, bringing in the feminine where
Mhm,
it was being excluded. And there's also a center in my hometown called the Zeidler Center, and they train people to facilitate conversations in circles about like topics where there is disagreement, and their method circling again, right? Their method is that each person speaks only from their perspective. So
mm,
they're not allowed to say, well, here's what I think about those people. Let's say they are, not tolerant of LGBTQ. Okay, let's talk about that. But what you share is your experience.
Hmm.
So your experience, oh yeah, my uncle was always saying this
Yeah.
about, right? So it
Yeah.
just that opens the space then for the sharing of perspectives that aren't judged. And so there's no other, it's this is my experience. And then the people who maybe are the victims of that intolerance can also understand how that person has a wound that led to them having to close themselves off to the other.
Yeah.
So those are the things that come up, and I could talk about nonviolent resistance right now, or we can talk a little, or do you want to say, like, are you chomping at the bit to react to some of the things
Oh
I'm
no,
saying?
I mean, just a little bit, and that I'm a big fan of restorative justice,
Mhm.
and I think that it could help solve so many of our conflicts in
Yeah.
our local communities if we started to embrace this process in schools, in our social systems. But um, I always kind of think of it as it's like the both and. It's like
Mhm.
bringing in that we're not trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? We're saying there are some things about this system that we want to keep, and then we want to pull this in too, and then it
Yeah.
creates something more. And it's, I think for me, I feel like the challenge lies in um, that I can hear is the both and. Like I'm
Hmm.
very much an idealist, and I can see the vision of how this plays out. I've seen it in small ways, and the masculine kind of pragmatism or realism tries to like overtake that, and I always tell people, I said, well, but I am a pragmatic idealist, so it's both and for me. Anyway.
Yeah, and I am sorry. What the attachment to the so-called rational approach, we don't make rational decisions. All of our systems are based on emotion. In fact,
Mhm.
if you look at it, the one-sided masculine patriarchy is based in fear of the other. It's not rational. Now, the
Mhm.
behavior is rational, given that if you live in scarcity mode,
Mhm.
then your behavior makes sense. But if you really want to be objective and rational,
Yeah.
don't tell me you're being rational, because how is that working for you?
Mhm.
Like, it's not working. And Mary Triggiano shares this beautiful story of, and and restorative justice doesn't work for all situations. And that's where you have to understand nuance and subtleties. And, people don't want to have patience for that. But she told the story of how there was a car dealer owner, and two young men went and like smashed it up. And so now now they're in court,
Mhm.
right? And for one of the young men, it was a first offense. And so they're like, okay, let's try this other approach. And I can't remember all the details, but I think they invited the car dealer owner to be part of a process where he actually took time to explain to the young man the impact on his life from that young man's decision to engage in destructive behavior. And he talked about how he had to close and he couldn't afford to pay employees and he had to let them go. And one of the employees was a pregnant mom. And so the young man was like, wow, I didn't realize that one action that felt so good in the moment, like,
Mhm.
had this kind of impact. And the young man was truly remorseful. And that wasn't the end of it. So the car dealer man said, well, as part of his not punishment, but as part of accountability, he
Mhm.
asked if the young man wanted to come work for him and help him clean up. And so repair, right? Repairs of the
Repair.
breach.
Yeah.
So, so the young man was able to not only redeem himself, but to grow skills and confidence and to feel like he had an impact on this man and his family. What does that do for you? That makes you feel important as a human being. That's why
Mhm.
just punishment doesn't work, because shaming only makes things worse, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
I love that story.
Never
So
solve harm with harm.
no, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hurt people and all that kind of stuff. But so one other thought I had was learning when I was um in my courses, uh one of the things that we did is we read about how nonviolent resistance works from a depth psychology perspective. So,
Hmm.
and basically you probably can imagine ideas of nonviolent resistance, but inside what's happening is one party, who's the aggressor, has been trained in a certain feedback loop that
Hmm.
just keeps reinforcing his need to lash out, right? And so that person expects to be treated in a certain way. And because he's not aware, that actually his unconscious seeks to
Hmm.
put him back in that situation so he can feel powerful or whatever it is. So lack of consciousness is really the issue. So, okay, so let's say there's that person and let's say he says something aggressive or intolerant or bigoted or whatever it is. It's, there's beautiful stories about this. And so the other person can choose how, well, not always. Emotions you don't control, but you control your thinking and like, how do I label what's going on here? Right. And
Hmm.
so you might, and this is why this is the work that has to be done now with people is to, there are a lot of things going on that are very triggering.
Hmm.
Right. And so that's your inner work,
Yeah.
irrespective of the objective harm
Hmm.
is the intensity of your emotional reaction is saying that there's something for you to heal so that you are not triggered by that behavior and instead you can respond more effectively. So
Yeah.
let's say that kind of person is able to respond in this situation. Instead of reinforcing this person's belief about themselves, their unworthiness,
Hmm.
somebody might say, oh, like that's really interesting that you chose to use that word to describe people. Oh, I'm just curious, like, when did you start using that word?
Yeah.
In that moment, because that person, you disrupted their expectation, they're like, first of all, there's like a momentary lapse in defensiveness. And there
Yeah.
is a space of love and peace, or a space
Yeah.
that is neutral where something can fit in. And
Yeah.
so that person might dig in their heels more. And you might have to say, oh, that's interesting too. Right. Or
Mhm.
they might go, wow, nobody's asked me
Yeah.
that before.
Yeah.
And so that is peace building.
Yeah.
And
It's
so, yeah,
curiosity.
it is curiosity.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
wondering why instead of being critical and punitive to it.
Right.
And it's difficult work. It's
Oh,
really difficult
yeah.
as a neurodivergent human and my skills and my nervous system regulation, it's something I work on all the time. And the one thing that I share with my collective often is the pause. Because if you can that's the first step, being able to pause and not react immediately. Just pause and take that moment. And we can't always do that. There's times where conflict is a little bit more I don't know, challenging than being able to step
Yeah.
away, but it is a really good tool just to be able to step away.
And it's liberating. So if you can process like, why am I reacting that way?
Hmm.
Because to somebody else that might just be annoying.
Yeah.
But for me, what is it?
Yeah.
So I am very triggered by oppressive religious ideas.
Mm.
Okay, now nothing really literally has happened to me. I haven't been oppressed by, rigid religious ideas, but I know that there's a fear,
Yeah.
and it's a collective fear that women carry for being murdered, right? Just for being women. So there's that. Like we
Yeah.
all sort of carry that, but why? What is it about me that makes me like rigid? So I have had to wrestle with that and reclaim my power and
Hmm.
and to understand that those rigid ideas that people want to oppress on me and my body are based in fear. What does
Hmm.
that mean if they're afraid of me?
Yeah.
I have power.
Yeah.
Of course, women have power. Men are absolute like have jelly legs in front of a beautiful naked woman. They don't
Mhm.
they don't like that fear. Now they're not even conscious
Yeah.
that that's why they want to control women. But
Hmm.
so, if people who are in a marginalized group realize that other people fearing you is really a reflection of something that they fear in themselves. And it's a reflection of their own, lack of self-worth.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, that's my long answer to your
That's
first
okay. It's a
question.
great answer. Well, and this is a good tie into the next question anyways, because you're kind of going into some of the work that
Oh,
you
good.
do.
Yeah.
And can you share a little bit about your journey into depth psychology and what inspired you to pursue this field?
So I was thinking that I have a whole midlife unraveling story that, talk about experiential learning. That was the meaning of the synchronicity that caused me to answer this call to depth psychology. And I lived all the concepts in real time. But really, when it comes to peace building, the thing that I really think about is during one of our courses, it was looking at vocation through a depth psychology lens.
Hmm.
So vocation meaning, work, career, like how did you get interested in doing this? And that your earliest childhood memories can help you make sense of your trajectory, your map. So,
Yeah.
many of us have very meandering resumes. They're like, I went and did that, I did a little that, I did and then we feel like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Right. Well, there's a reason for all of that. And that capital S self inside is sort of prompting certain things. So in partners, my earliest childhood memories, I had never even thought about it before, were number one being about 3 or 4. And I don't even know if it really looked like this or not, but living in an apartment and my dad being there reading the comics. And in Milwaukee, the comics back then were called the green sheet because it was green paper. And hearing a siren outside and feeling afraid. And then
Mhm.
my next memory, so like 3 of them came right together. My next memory was being bullied. So for kindergarten through 4th grade, I was at an elementary school in Milwaukee. There were changing economics going on, and there was just it was a mess, let's say. And I was bullied pretty mercilessly. Like my hair pulled every day. I'm an INFJ, so I internalized instead of like, I think an extroverted person might strike out, right? So I was introverted and I was afraid of telling. And Ginger was my nemesis, and she had people back me up against a fence, and she was going to punch me, and then somebody came and saved me. And so there was that whole feeling of like fear. Like now I don't remember what it felt to be, what I felt then. It's in my body, right? That fear. So, but there was a third memory, and this is what got me really thinking. And the memory was that there was a place on the playground where I felt safe. And there was a huge old tree and dirt, and it's where people played marbles. And I got into playing marbles and was very good. And for anybody out there that's my age, like we used to trade our tiger eyes and our steelies and our marbles, and I felt safe there. So I was like, I don't really know what this means yet, but processing it was putting something in motion. And so, my partners were asking me questions about that. And I said, oh, Oprah Winfrey comes up for me. I always really appreciated Oprah Super Soul Sunday. And I was kind of addicted to it at the time. And I thought she's got the best job ever. She's just really being a student. So
Mhm.
if you ever like watch Super Soul Sunday, she talks almost as much as the guests do. And she's basically repeating back to them what she's learning. And so that's how she's learning is she's like, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So I thought, I don't know, I just love her. And she was showing up in some of my dreams at the time. Okay. What also happened during that residential when we were doing that course is I had applied for a job not knowing if I was going to get it at all. And I got the job to be the executive director of Playworks.
Mm.
Okay. So at the time, I'm not making heads or tails of this. So I go back, and in 2 weeks, I think I started my job, and we had 26 schools that were our clients where we did this program. And guess who one of the schools was? My elementary school where I
Holy,
was. Yeah. So I hadn't been back to my elementary school since I left in 4th grade.
wow.
And I was like, and they were a playwork school already, which means they were amazing. And I was like,
Mhm.
wow, circling back again. I'm like, okay, I'm circling back and I'm back at a place where I felt fear, but yet it feels so good here. Well, then I was having dreams that my school was showing up and I was going down into the basement, which meant there was something down in my unconscious that I had to get. During my time at Playworks, the first 6 months, we lived and breathed play. So we played during the day. We had recess, and play is a peace building activity. When
Yeah.
you're playing, you're present. You're not scared. You're not masking. You're not doing, if you can get yourself to play, right? So
Mhm.
some people feel silly playing.
Yes.
At the same time, I was like unleashing my buried inner child, and I was starting to skip down the sidewalk and do cartwheels on the beach and all of this stuff. And then my program director, he was kind of like, he told this story. I said, I was the one who was bullied. He says, I was the bully, and I'm trying to make up for it still. And I was like, what? And we worked together so well. So there was definitely like this inner transformation like happening. And so, yeah, like that's an important part of my journey in depth psychology. It was the falling apart in midlife that sort of got me there. But part of the work of depth psychology is to do this exploring and to go back and explore a mother wound and all of these wounds and I don't know, it just like, yeah, so
That's beautiful.
yeah.
I love all your I identify. So I am an INFJ as well.
Yeah,
So
so we're already misfits. We're only
yeah.
3% of the global population.
I know, right? Yeah, and I think so many of people in my collective just really identify with that whole story. We're very much meaning makers, you know, like
Yeah,
it's we're really trying to make meaning out of past experiences to reframe them and so that it moves us in a direction that feels good. And that's a lot of what I hear and what you're saying, and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
really
So there was
beautiful.
some peace building, going on inside. And
Mhm.
then also, of course, that
Relational.
was, yeah, manifesting. I led a group of, 24 people who did this work. And I mean, I'm still finding more meaning,
Yeah.
in my time there, my
Yeah.
experience there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's like such a small thing too, that like play
Mhm.
that people can do in organizations and social systems that they just take for granted. And I used to be run a restaurant organization, and we had 17 locations. And when we came together for we had quarterly retreats, and when we came together for our quarterly retreats, that's all we did. That's
Yeah.
all we did was play. And there was some that were skeptical of my way of doing things, and I'm like, you have no idea what this is doing for us. Like just coming together and seeing that we're all real people, and we all have the same goals, and we all have, you know, within the organization at least, and it takes the competition out of things. It's
Mhm.
like it creates a different kind of dynamic when you play, even as
Yeah.
adults. So,
Well, and just so you know, there's lots of research on the benefits of adults playing. I
mhm,
mean, it enhances creative thinking because the mind doesn't create. The unconscious creates, the feminine
mhm,
creates, and it's not always ready to be articulated through the mind, right? And
mm,
that's why drawing, well, I mean, why do you think therapists ask family members to draw?
yeah,
Because their unconscious can't, sometimes the mind can't articulate the insight, but it might come out in a drawing.
yeah,
Yeah. So play is really important, but it's also, why do people resist it? Because when you're present, you're vulnerable.
mhm,
And right. And so now, even though we don't really like patriarchy, it's now, as Carol Gilligan would say, is a defense mechanism for everyone to avoid the vulnerability that's required for connection. So we
yeah,
have to be conscious, and we have to consciously build our container, our capacity to be awkward
mhm,
and vulnerable. And when we do that, we create space for other people to do the same. And then we show up in the world in a different way. And then it's that butterfly
yeah.
effect. Yeah.
I think that's why we need us misfits, because we're willing to show up awkward and vulnerable.
We are embracing it. So
Yeah.
let's use it.
Oh, okay. Well, let's get on to the next question. So how do you see the principles and practices of depth psychology contributing to people, which you've already kind of talked about this, but I'll let you kind of move on from that too, but contributing to peace building efforts. And can you give examples where you see overlaps or synergies?
Oh, so this is where I like have to look at my notes and I was like, did I write that? Like I just went off on reflections. I'm like, it was so much fun to look at psychology through like a peace building lens. So here's what I came up with. Like depth psychology at its core is reconciliation psychology.
Ooh, I
I
kind
just
of just,
made that up. I just
well, I
made that
just,
up.
and all the hairs on my arms just stood up. So,
Because here's why. Depth psychology is okay. So one of the founders of depth psychology is Carl Jung.
Mhm.
And depth psychology is the study of the unconscious, which is about the feminine after it got split off, right? So at a certain point, there wasn't this reverence for both the masculine and the feminine, and even for sexuality and all that stuff. And then between patriarchy, which there's current theories on like why that started, it wasn't necessarily an evolutionary urge. It was really more about like scarcity. And
Mhm.
then the beginning of Christian doctrine, which there was not agreement about what to write in doctrine. There were all kinds of choices, but it really, I suspect, got swept up by patriarchy. But there was also the feminine was there and has always been fighting to be alive. The feminine is in Mary, the mother of God. The early churches were built on top of old goddess temples, right? And so you have this split off of the feminine and the elevation of the masculine and the denigration of the feminine. And then the feminine, which is in all of us, is like, oh no, women are the feminine, their bodies, sexuality, and nature, and we're going to exploit them all. And so that patriarchy, and then you add religion, which makes it righteous to exploit it, right? And so, and once you have power, power is not given freely unless there's consciousness of what real power is. Real power is not force, right? Real power is I'm not afraid, but patriarchy's afraid. And all those patriarchal systems maintain their grip through different forms of violence economically, environmentally, physically, like sowing division. Those are all, that's why like there's deep meaning in what's going on right now, because the climax and the regression is trying to prompt a new unleashing of consciousness raising. So it's painful to get there. But anyway, the depth psychology is more in alignment with the root of psychology. If you look it up, it's soul and breath.
Yeah.
And what is everybody preoccupied with? Neuropsychology, brain, mind. I'm so sick of it. And what is that obsession? Because it is a fear of
Mhm.
the unknown, of the unconscious. And that's the final frontier we have to go to.
Mhm.
So, depth psychology and Carl Jung's theories really are like, how do we reconcile? And even the book of Revelation, looked at through a depth psychology lens, isn't about a literal end of days. It's about the ending of a certain way of thinking and of being human.
Yeah.
And when we don't know what's going to replace it, you and I are like, we're just going, we're going to see what happens. Everybody else is like has anxiety. Oh, I see everything falling apart, but I don't know what's going to take its place. So I'm just going to like, I don't know. So we need people to come into their own inner reconciliation, peace building, so that they aren't triggered by the
Yeah.
world and they can see more clearly what our options are and they can respond, not react. So
Yeah.
like I could go all sorts of different ways, but I mean, right?
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant because it's just bringing up so much in me, like how we think that as a society that power is this this kind of false strength and it's what is creating the violence, but it's actually fear. It's
Yeah,
not
weak and
courage.
it's
It's not
weakness.
courage. It's
No,
weakness and it's fear. It's not courage at all. Courage is the reconciliation. That takes real courage.
well, that's right. So to be vulnerable takes courage. To
Mhm.
be like hyper toxic masculine, that's easy, man. You're not showing, you think you're tough because you're like, oh, putting somebody down, you don't know that you're trying to make up for your inner weakness. Oh, I feel so sorry for you.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like the true hero's journey is that is going this way and not
It
projecting this way. Yeah.
well, right. And my conversation with Craig Chalquist, because of course James Hillman, Joseph Campbell, who wrote Hero with a Thousand Faces and Star Wars, got the myth right. They're rethinking our westernized view of the hero's journey is very not correct because
Hmm.
the hero heroine's journey requires that you circle back to community with your wisdom. You
Yeah.
don't just go off and like go have a martini or whatever. I mean, maybe you do that first because you need a break, but then you come back
Oh,
and like you share your wisdom with the community.
wow.
So,
Well, you
yeah,
know my thoughts on liberation psychology
yeah,
and the self-actualization and community actualization are two parts of the same wheel. That is
yeah,
part of the deal. So,
yeah.
oh, wow, just beautiful. Um, all right. All right. So, question 4. So, in your experience, how does individual psychological well-being impact broader community peace? Can you share any examples from your work? Which that was a nice transition.
Yeah. Well, I work with quite a few couples and if you're not well, couples therapy is not effective unless both people are doing their own work.
Mm,
Otherwise, it's just a bunch of projection onto the other. So, it's interesting because I can see what's happening, but the emotions really prevent people from being able to separate in a conflict what's theirs and what's the other person.
mm,
And if there's anger on both sides, then it's really a mess, right? Because between two people are four conversations happening. There's mind to mind, consciousness, my mind to your unconscious, your mind to my unconscious, and all the juicy stuff is between our unconscious.
mm,
And so I tell people wherever there is emotion that's more than annoyance, there's something going on that is about something very old. It's not you're not mad at what you think you're mad at.
mhm,
Now, that other person's objective, their behavior could be objectively bad. But somebody might go, that's really, dude, that wasn't cool. Not like, oh, just raging. You're raging because of what they did. So the emotion, the intensity of the emotion is a clue that, whoa, why am I so angry? Like, yes, that thing that you did, and some people can even go, I don't know why I just unloaded like that. Like, I don't, but they don't know.
yeah,
So when you begin in that situation to take back your projection, understand the root, express that old emotion. That old emotion, like anger, is also potentially creative when it's expressed.
mm,
So, and then you begin to see the other person more clearly for the human being they are, fallible human being. And then if they do it on the other side, now you're in what Carl Jung called a psychological marriage, where you
mm,
have consciousness that all conflicts have this, okay, what's my part? What's your part? How can we break it apart and see what happened? When did the emotion come? And what is that that's being channeled there? And it becomes like something you can look at like a movie and you can get it out of your bodies. And then that reconciliation can be beautiful for the relationship. So think about it. If you're
yeah,
feeling like less triggered by your own husband, your that husband's energy is channeling something, maybe your father mother wound.
mhm,
It's everywhere out in the world. It might
yeah,
show up as your boss. It might
yeah,
show up as your colleague, your coworker, right? And
yeah,
so your unconscious is always trying to put you in situations where you are reenacting and reliving a trauma until you learn the lesson that you're supposed to learn, like I am worthy or whatever the lesson is, right? So
mhm,
think about how, one work with one difficult relationship can change the way that then you show up with every other person that kind of is triggering that same sort of thing.
yeah,
And then doing this work in a group or a collective level is difficult, but there's there's so many ways and tools that you can use now. For example, like love languages. You can
Mhm.
use the concept of love language. What is that about? It's not only about identifying how you prefer to receive and show love. It is identifying that, well, just because you enjoy receiving love that way doesn't mean your partner does.
Yeah.
And so how that's not very nice. Like the physical might be, number one for you, but if it's number five for your partner, she may feel pressured
Mhm.
and also bad that
Yeah.
she, isn't excited about certain things as you are. So there's so many tools that actually can be translated to the work world. I recently worked with a company and we asked a question, how do you prefer to receive appreciation at work? And we
Mm.
just used the love languages
Mhm.
for it. So any kind of process that allows you not only to understand yourself more, and I think a lot of people are like, well, I'm that way, and they stop there.
Yeah.
Um, but also like, oh, this isn't the only way to be.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm really curious that you're like that. But what gets in the way of that is our self-judgment. So
Mhm.
anytime we're judgmental about another person, it's because of an inner self-judgment. And
Yeah.
so when we come into more acceptance of all the parts of ourselves, we automatically are more accepting of other people.
Mhm.
So,
I've seen that in action.
yeah, yeah,
I'm very um, privileged to be in a relationship where we are both doing that work
yeah,
and separately and together. And it's hard work. I will say
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Not easy. It's not easy to be in a relationship where there is a continual feedback loop of, psychological and spiritual effort, right? That we're constantly doing together, but it's definitely
yeah.
so.
Yeah, and you're always like, okay, what lesson am I supposed to be learning? Or like Oprah, I love when she said, Lord, it's Monday. Can you just please spare me teaching me a lesson this week? Can I just
Yeah.
skip this week? Right? Like, right?
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
had those weeks.
And
Yeah.
then also, but also like you can have a sense of humor about it.
Yeah.
And can you be like, oh, Hermes, did you really now? Like,
Yeah.
really? We got to do this now?
I have my inner child's name is Caitlin. So
Oh,
I'll sometimes say, "Oh, that was Caitlin."
yeah, right.
It's just a joke
Caitlin,
between
I'm
us. Yeah.
sorry. Have I been ignoring you? I mean,
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
just like, tap me on the shoulder. You don't have to come out that way.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Well,
and
that,
then there's the play piece though too in relational dynamics. Um I mean, playing with your partner, we go to the playground sometimes and just play on
oh,
this. I mean, and just that dynamic, I don't know, there's something about it that just it creates a sense of vulnerability. It's almost like
yes.
you can then have different kinds of conversations and maybe and there's probably I'm sure chemicals that are happening, dopamine and oxytocin and all the stuff, but
Well, but think about when you're playing, you're not thinking.
Mhm.
And the
Mm.
mind is defensive by nature because the mind seeks to protect. How do you protect? From affirming and confirming that you already know what there is to know.
Yeah.
So when you play, you're just giving the mind a break. You don't have to be mad at the mind. The mind
Yeah.
is overworked. Like you can say, I'm so sorry, mind. I'm just always like wanting so much from you. I'm
Mhm.
going to build the capacity to play and to give you a break, take a vacation. That's where active imagination can really be helpful in dialoguing with these various characters like Caitlin.
Yeah. I'm gonna take that advice for this weekend. I think my mind needs some
Yeah.
break.
Yeah. Well,
I need
you're
play.
you're an intellect. And so
Yeah.
you have to balance that out with like, oh, Caitlin knows what she's talking about.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
She does.
Love it.
And I think it's been reflected in this. So, but
I
this
love it.
isn't me. So, uh, all right. Well, I got one more question for you if we have
Yeah.
time.
Yes.
Okay. So, for others who are interested in combining their professional expertise with peace building, what advice would you offer based on your experience and reflections?
So I was trying to come up with something really practical and simple. The first thing that's not simple is knowledge of self. It just starts with knowledge of self. and um and paying attention to your emotions. Conflicts are your gift. Conflicts are an invitation to disarm whatever is bringing about that negative emotion. So instead of suppressing or hiding or whatever it is, just go, oh, Hermes the trickster. Okay, here it is.
Mhm.
Don't do it in the moment. Or take a recent conflict and debrief it. And a
Mhm.
really good thing to ask yourself is, next time or the last time you were really angry, you really had a negative emotion, whether it was shame, anger, hatred, rage, whatever it was, whatever difficult emotion, ask yourself this question: what is my earliest memory of being in this emotional state?
Mm.
You'll have a memory come up, and there you go. So now you go back, and it'll be like you're 6 or you're 8, you're in middle school, and this very specific thing happened.
Mm.
Because we don't know, as children, we're very sensitive. We don't know
Mhm.
how to process. We just let things roll off,
Mhm.
right? And unless we have an adult around who's like, oh, honey, come here, let me hold space for that. That's
Mhm.
not usually our experience. It's just like, oh, well, I got to go on. I got to keep living and nobody's teaching me anything. So whatever. But that experience is in your body, and they know science wise, our memories are stored in our body. They manifest as certain health issues. They
Mhm.
now, what do they call it? ACEs. They now know that check, whatever you check your adverse childhood experiences, they actually can predict what kinds of disease you're going to have 40 years from now.
Yeah.
Now, we know that in depth psychology, we know this somatic depth psychology, right? But people just need to they need proof, they need proof to something that's so intuitive.
Yeah.
So that's where it is. I mean, it's that simple. Any conflict, take a conflict at work. And after, say, okay, let's debrief this. Here's what happened. Here's what was going on that day. Whatever it is, this is that thing that that person said. That word did it, or that
Yeah.
look, or the fact that he or she did this, that did it. And then you
Mhm.
just ask the question, what is my earliest memory? It might only be 5 years ago. And then next time you'll go back, you'll keep going back until you get to the origin of it. And then you realize, oh, that was then. This is now. Something's going on that's not integrated in me. I've split something off that keeps getting projected onto the outside world. What is it? How can I take it back? How can I wrap my arms around it? How can I name it?
Mhm.
Name it a character? How can I say thank you for trying to protect me? Because that's what that emotional reaction was about. Don't feel bad about it. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you have to say sorry to somebody, but find the deeper meaning. So I don't know. I think like you could have a lot of fun with that. And
Yeah.
you will automatically, that is inner peace building.
Yeah.
So then how does that impact outer peace building? Well, think about it. You're showing up differently. And now, because your emotion isn't reacting, you're actually able to see something new that you couldn't see before. And you can see that person differently as a
Yeah.
fallible human being. And you might even go, wow, I used to get so angry at that, and I don't anymore. What's that about? And then you can see their wound, because all of our wounds like just wound each other.
Yeah. It's beautiful work. I I'm tiptoeing into that land these days, and it really is. And I think what's so important too is to for people to realize that our generation, we were latchkey kids. A lot of us didn't, and to no fault of anybody's
Yeah.
necessarily, but didn't get that attunement when those things occurred. And so
Yeah.
it kind of gives us a chance to
No, we
like,
just we just got in trouble when the parents
yeah.
came home.
Yeah, exactly. And so we get a chance to like to reattune with that part of ourselves. We get to neglect the idea that time is linear, and we get to bring that piece back. And it's so interesting because so many it's usually it just happens to usually be men that tell me this, that are scared of doing that work because they're so there's that fear, the fear
Yeah.
that something's going to be exposed, a vulnerability from
Yeah.
childhood to be exposed, and I get
And
that.
that's the key. Like you want
Yeah,
to find it, man, because once you
yeah,
find it, you can disarm
yeah.
the
You
fear.
integrate
Yeah.
it, and
Yeah.
then you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
It's not a thing, that's
Yeah.
hanging out back there.
Yeah. But they're doing it. Men are doing work.
Oh, yes, I know there are many men doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and I'm very honored that they're doing that.
Yeah.
Well, great. That's all I had.
Fantastic.
I just feel so kind of blown away by this conversation. So,
Yeah. Oh, I know. I think you and I could talk more about this because
oh my
I
gosh, for
mean,
days. Yeah.
if I thought about it more, I have great stories. So, um, yeah, and I love it because it's just another lens to see my work through and to like how interconnected it's the feminine, it's the meandering feminine is what it reminds me of. We don't need to create like I'm doing a peace building movement, I'm
Hmm.
doing, and we rely on like some kind of smart think tank or people to do this when, this is my favorite thing to say that Carl Jung said was the fate of humanity depends upon the self-reflecting individual. So we don't need people to follow rules right now. We need people to develop their own sense, their own inner moral authority and reconcile their inner so that they can show up and be more effective. And and believe it or not, things that unleash into the collective that like take off as new ideas or whatever, that doesn't that happens because of all the individual work. All
Hmm.
change comes from the grassroots and from underneath. Like the 80s when all the stuff unleashed about women and it was anger and it was good, like it was like amazing what unleashed.
Yeah.
Well, that started with Betty Friedan's book, right? The Feminine Mystique, where she was like, "Oh, lots of women's stories have this theme together and here's some evidence of this is going on." And it was like her combination of how she wrote that book where people were like, I'm not alone.
Hmm.
And so all my clients and all your work is we're all just putting little sparks
Yep.
of enlightenment up there. And soon, very soon, it's going to coalesce as like an overarching, as Edward Edinger would say, a new God image, not meaning God, but a new like
Hmm.
image about just something that pulls us forward in towards love, which is what consciousness raising is.
Yeah. It's a
So
paradigm shift and
yeah,
it's happening.
it
It's
is happening. Look out, you cranky people. Here we go.
Yeah.
We're gonna, as the pastor of a church I went to for 6 months, a progressive Baptist church, focus on progressive. The assistant pastor would say, we're going to love on you no matter if you want it or not.
Yeah. I
Yep.
love that. It's funny. It it's a common thing that they say in Alcoholics Anonymous is we're going to love you until you love yourself, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's the community piece as well. It's like it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
we're seeing it all over. It's
Yeah.
in so many different spaces, and that just brings me such hope. Like I have hope every day. I have hope that things are moving towards this type of peace building. We're going to
You
start to see it infiltrate. So
You kind of have to, and we don't get to pick our time in history to do this work. We just have to do it. So I'm so glad that you wanted to do this. And oh yeah, how can people, I don't know, what do you want from people? How do you want them to support you or follow you, or where can they get information or resources or whatever? And I'll include all those links too in the description
yeah,
box.
yeah. I think at this point, the Compassion Collective, they can go to it's thecompassioncollective.earth, and you can
Oh,
see what we do. If that's something that you want to participate in, if you're a neurodivergent person and you're looking for a community or you're looking for resources, we have all kinds of ways to be involved in our community. I mean, if Facebook's your thing, we have some community space there. We have a Discord server. We're kind of just we're a community building a community. So
you're really growing. Like,
it's
wow, you've
growing.
got a
Yeah.
website now.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. And it's just growing at its pace, right?
Yeah.
It's doing its thing.
Yes.
It was built on a generative structure and it's generating. So yeah.
Love it. I love it. Okay, so we'll share all that. And yeah, I look forward to our next chat.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
Thank you
so
so much. This
you're
has been
welcome.
great.
You're
All right.
welcome. So I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Cher about peace building and you recognize where you might be engaging in peace building activities already. Or maybe you want to find a local organization that trains people on facilitating respectful conversations on difficult topics. Or maybe you want to research how to integrate restorative justice concepts or play into your work culture or even at home. We're too serious at home. So there'll be links in the description box to my previous chat with Cher about how us misfits will save the world and how to follow and support Cher. And then one more thing, of course, if you enjoy my podcast and this interview, of course, like and subscribe, but share with at least one person or your network that you think might enjoy this. And of course, consider supporting me as a creator and a producer as a $5 monthly supporter. Until next time.